My parents called me a failure at family dinner, saying I couldn't even hold down a steady job like my sister. They didn't know that while they were criticizing my unstable career, I was leading the FBI's most classified investigation. When my sister's colleague, Federal Prosecutor Michael Torres, stood up and said, "Your daughter isn't a failure. She's the FBI deputy director who just saved this nation from terrorism," the room went silent. The failure they'd humiliated was actually the second highest ranking official in the FBI. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed. Because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. I should have known something was wrong when my mother, Claire Anderson, answered the door wearing her most disappointed expression, the same look she'd worn when I'd chosen criminal justice over pre-law at Yale. I'd just driven 4 hours from Washington, D.C., my FBI credentials still clipped to my jacket from the classified briefing I'd finished an hour before leaving. It was our monthly family dinner, and for once I'd hoped my parents might finally understand why I couldn't always make it to these gatherings. But let me tell you how a family can destroy your spirit in a single evening, how they can make you question everything you've sacrificed for your country, only to discover that while they were calling you a failure, you were actually protecting their freedom to have that dinner in the first place. This is the story of how I went from being the family disappointment to leading the most critical national security operations in the country, and how sometimes the people who understand sacrifice the least are the ones who benefit from it the most. The Anderson family had built their reputation on 3 generations of legal excellence and social respectability. My grandfather had been a prominent federal judge who'd helped establish civil rights precedents in the 1960s. My father had followed as a senior partner at Anderson, Whitman & Associates, one of Chicago's most prestigious corporate law firms. My older sister Rebecca had continued the family tradition perfectly. Harvard Law School, federal prosecutor, now assistant U.S. attorney, with a clear path to eventually becoming a federal judge herself. I was supposed to be next in line, the daughter who would cement the Anderson legacy in the legal profession. Instead, I'd chosen what they saw as a career dead end. While Rebecca was prosecuting white-collar criminals and building her reputation in federal court, I was working undercover assignments that I couldn't discuss with anyone. While she was attending legal conferences and networking with judges, I was coordinating with international intelligence agencies on operations that couldn't exist in any public record. But tonight felt different. Tonight I was coming home after successfully concluding the most significant counterterrorism operation of my career. Just 72 hours earlier, I'd led a joint FBI-CIA task force that had dismantled a domestic terrorism cell planning coordinated attacks on 3 major American cities. The operation had taken 18 months of deep cover work, countless sleepless nights, and personal sacrifices that had cost me relationships and any semblance of a normal life. The irony wasn't lost on me that Rebecca, their golden child, was currently prosecuting cases that often depended on intelligence gathered by agents like me. But I hadn't come to compete for recognition. I'd come hoping that maybe, finally, they'd trust that my frequent absences and vague explanations about my work meant something important, even if I couldn't share the details. The Anderson family home in Lincoln Park reflected generations of legal success. Leather-bound law books, framed court victories, and photographs with federal judges and politicians. This was where I'd grown up feeling like an outsider, the daughter who preferred tactical training to law school prep courses, who dreamed of protecting people rather than representing them in court. My mother had made her concerns clear from the beginning. "Sweetheart, FBI work is so unpredictable," she'd said when I graduated from Quantico. "You're brilliant enough to be arguing cases before the Supreme Court, but you're choosing a career where you'll always be someone else's employee, following orders instead of making legal precedent." My father had been more direct. "Criminal investigation work is a young person's game. What's your advancement path? How do you build lasting professional influence?" Rebecca had been the most cutting. "Emma, you're wasting your potential," she'd said during our last conversation 6 months ago. "I'm prosecuting cases that shape federal law, while you're essentially a very expensive police officer. When you're ready to use your law degree for something meaningful, I can probably get you an interview with the U.S. Attorney's Office. But standing in that familiar living room, wearing my conservative blazer to hide the shoulder holster I couldn't remove even off duty, I knew something they didn't. I hadn't chosen the easy path, I'd chosen the path that required everything. Rebecca cornered me in the kitchen before I could join the family dinner, her expression cold with years of accumulated frustration. She looked impeccable in her tailored business suit, every inch the successful federal prosecutor. But her eyes held something that made my stomach sink, the look of someone who'd been planning this confrontation for months. "Emma, we need to talk before you sit down with everyone," she said, blocking my path to the dining room. "The family has been discussing your situation." "My situation?" I kept my voice steady despite the dread building in my chest. "What situation would that be?" She pulled out her phone and showed me her recent conviction statistics. High-profile white-collar criminals, organized crime figures, corrupt politicians. "This is what a successful legal career looks like, Emma. Clear wins, public recognition, measurable impact on society. What exactly do you have to show for 15 years in the FBI?" I stared at her, confused. "Rebecca, you know I can't discuss most of my work." "Right. The mysterious classified assignments that conveniently excuse every missed family event, every canceled holiday, every time you disappear for months without explanation." Her voice grew louder, and I could see our parents approaching from the dining room. "When are you going to admit that you're stuck in a dead-end government job with no real advancement prospects?" My father appeared behind her, his face set with the disappointment I'd seen countless times growing up. Thomas Anderson had always measured success by courtroom victories and social recognition. Tonight, he looked at me like I was a problem that needed solving. "Emma, your mother and I have been patient, but this federal agent phase has gone on long enough," he said, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to winning arguments. "You're 38 years old with a law degree from Yale, and you're essentially a civil servant making a fraction of what you could earn in private practice." "Dad, I'm not just a civil servant." "Aren't you?" My mother appeared, flanked by Rebecca's colleague Michael Torres, a federal prosecutor who'd been invited to dinner. "Emma, honey, we love you, but we're concerned. You live like someone who's hiding from success instead of pursuing it." The accusations came rapid-fire now, a coordinated intervention that felt rehearsed. Michael Torres stepped forward, his voice filled with professional authority. "Emma, I've worked with Rebecca for 3 years, and I've seen what real federal prosecution looks like. Your sister has put away criminals who've stolen millions, dismantled organized crime operations, and protected countless victims. What comparable impact have you made?" "I can't discuss my cases," I started, but Rebecca cut me off. "That's the problem. You hide behind classification levels and security clearances, like they excuse the fact that you have nothing concrete to show for your career. No public victories, no measurable outcomes, no career advancement." My mother stepped closer, her eyes filled with what she probably thought was compassion. "Sweetheart, we think you're afraid of real legal competition. FBI work lets you avoid the pressure of courtroom advocacy and client responsibility. It's safer than practicing real law. We've taken the liberty of making some inquiries," my father added, pulling out business cards from prestigious law firms. "Several partners are willing to interview you for senior associate positions, real positions with partnership tracks, where you can finally use your education properly." The sounds of dinner preparation continued just yards away. Normal family conversation about Rebecca's latest courtroom triumph, her recent commendation from the U.S. Attorney General, her upcoming promotion. But I felt completely isolated, standing in that kitchen in my government-issued blazer, being lectured about failure by people who had no idea what real danger looked like. "We're doing this because we love you," Rebecca said with practiced sincerity, "but you can't keep hiding behind this FBI fantasy. It's time to build a real legal career and stop pretending that federal bureaucracy is more important than actual legal achievement." I stood there, holding my phone with its encrypted notifications about national security briefings, feeling like a stranger in my own family. The daughter they saw as a failure while they had no idea I spent my days preventing the kind of catastrophes that would make their comfortable legal careers impossible. By the next morning, the story had spread through Chicago's legal community like wildfire. Someone had shared details of the family intervention at the prestigious federal prosecutors networking event where Rebecca was being honored for her latest conviction. The gossip painted me as the Anderson family's embarrassment, a Yale law graduate who'd wasted her potential on low-level federal work while her sister achieved real legal prominence. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. My phone buzzed constantly with messages I didn't want to read. Former law school classmates, legal colleagues, family friends, all reaching out with a mixture of pity and career advice. Heard about the family dinner situation. Have you considered transitioning to corporate law? Maybe it's time to leverage your federal experience into a private sector position? Rebecca mentioned you might be looking for new opportunities. Let me know if you want an introduction to some firms. Each notification felt like another confirmation that everyone saw me as a failed lawyer hiding in government work. The professional embarrassment was crushing. Word spread through the federal legal community that Emma Anderson was having quote, career struggles, despite her prestigious background. Attorneys who had respected my work on joint task forces suddenly started offering me positions as paralegals or junior associates, assuming my FBI experience was just a detour before returning to real legal practice. David Kim, a defense attorney I'd worked with on several cases, called with obvious confusion. "Emma, I heard through the legal grapevine that you might be transitioning out of federal service. I always thought you were doing well with the Bureau." Before I could explain, he continued, "Look, if the government thing isn't working out career-wise, that's understandable. The pay and advancement opportunities are limited. We have an opening for a criminal defense associate. It's not prosecution, but it pays well and you'd be back in courtrooms where your law degree actually matters." The message was clear. My family's narrative had convinced everyone that my FBI career was a professional dead end that I needed to escape. Legal publications that had occasionally quoted my expertise on federal criminal procedure suddenly stopped returning my calls. The Chicago Bar Association, where I'd been invited to speak on federal-state cooperation, quietly withdrew their invitation. My professional reputation was being destroyed by a narrative that portrayed federal law enforcement as somehow less legitimate than traditional legal practice. The cruelest blow came when 3 attorneys from the U.S. Attorney's Office, people who work directly with FBI agents daily, reached out to offer me transition support. They'd heard I was reconsidering my career path and wanted to help me move into prosecution work that would better utilize my legal education. Sarah Martinez, an assistant U.S. attorney I'd worked with on multiple investigations, actually offered to recommend me for an entry-level prosecutor position. She had no idea she was essentially offering a demotion to someone whose security clearance was higher than hers and whose caseload involved national security matters she couldn't even know existed. The Chicago Tribune's legal section ran a profile on, quote, career transitions in federal service, using anonymous sources to discuss lawyers who'd, quote, struggled to find their place in government work. While they didn't name me specifically, the timing and details made it clear they were referencing my supposed career crisis. Local law schools where I'd occasionally guest lectured on federal criminal procedure began politely declining my offers to speak. The implication was clear. Someone whose own family questioned their career success wasn't the right person to advise law students about federal legal careers. I spent sleepless nights in my downtown apartment, staring at classified case files I couldn't discuss with anyone, wondering how protecting national security could be perceived as professional failure. My family had convinced an entire legal community that I was wasting my potential, and no amount of actual achievement seemed capable of changing that perception. The federal agent who'd just prevented a terrorist attack that would have killed thousands was being treated like someone who couldn't handle the pressure of real legal work. For weeks after the family dinner humiliation, I tried everything I could think of to rebuild my reputation without violating classification protocols. I sent my family copies of FBI recruitment materials and career advancement information, hoping they might understand that federal law enforcement had clear promotion pathways. I forwarded articles about successful FBI executives and their contributions to national security, thinking professional context might help them see my work differently. Every effort was met with condescending concern or outright dismissal. My mother reviewed the FBI career materials with the patience of someone humoring a confused child. "Emma, these brochures are very impressive, and I'm sure the FBI does important work. But sweetheart, you need to think about your personal advancement. Government work has salary caps and bureaucratic limitations that will prevent you from reaching your full potential." I tried reaching out to legal professionals who knew both my family's work and federal law enforcement, hoping they might help bridge the gap. Judge Patricia Morrison, who had worked with both Rebecca and various FBI officials, agreed to speak with my parents about federal careers. The conversation backfired completely. Judge Morrison later told me that my father had listened respectfully, then responded, "Patricia, I appreciate the FBI's mission, but you have to understand our concern. Emma has a brilliant legal mind that's being wasted on investigative work. Rebecca is shaping federal law through her prosecutions, while Emma is essentially following orders and filling out reports. I decided to invite my family to tour the FBI's Chicago field office, thinking that seeing the scope and sophistication of federal operations might help them understand my work's importance." Rebecca agreed to visit, but only after I explained that the office coordinated with U.S. Attorney prosecutions. She spent 90 minutes touring our facilities, meeting senior agents, and observing our coordination with other federal agencies. Afterward, her assessment was devastating. "Emma, this is obviously well organized, but you're basically a very expensive police officer with a law degree. When are you going to start using your Yale education to actually practice law instead of just supporting other people's legal cases?" My most desperate attempt came when I tried to hint at my actual responsibilities without revealing classified information. I mentioned that my, quote, recent assignments had involved complex multi-agency coordination, and that my work required high-level security clearances for sensitive national security matters. Instead of being impressed, my family became more concerned about what they saw as grandiose delusions. "Emma, every government employee thinks their work is critically important," my father said during a tense phone call. "But the reality is that you're middle management in a federal bureaucracy. You're not making policy, you're not arguing cases, you're not building anything lasting." The professional community's reaction was equally frustrating. Legal colleagues who had previously respected my expertise in federal criminal law started offering me career counseling instead of professional collaboration. "Emma, if you're not finding fulfillment in federal service, maybe it's time to consider litigation practice, where you can really use your advocate skills," one former law school classmate suggested. I began second-guessing every career decision I'd made since graduating from Yale. Late nights in my apartment, surrounded by classified briefing materials I couldn't discuss with anyone, I wondered if my family was right about my choices. Maybe federal law enforcement was just elaborate bureaucracy that prevented me from using my legal education effectively. The doubt crept in slowly but persistently. When operations succeeded, I questioned whether my role had been meaningful or if I was just following protocols developed by others. When supervisors praised my work, I wondered if they were just being supportive of someone stuck in middle management. When security clearances were upgraded, I second-guessed whether access to classified information was actually a form of professional advancement. By autumn, I had almost convinced myself that my family's assessment was correct. I was hiding in federal service instead of building a real legal career that would demonstrate my capabilities and education. The breakthrough came on a cold December afternoon when I was reviewing threat assessments in my downtown office. There was a knock on my door, and my assistant announced that someone was requesting an urgent meeting. A young federal prosecutor who said my work had directly impacted one of her most important cases. Lisa Chen entered my office nervously, clutching a thick case file against her chest. She was probably in her early 30s, professionally dressed, but with the slightly exhausted look of someone who'd been working around the clock on a major prosecution. I didn't immediately recognize her, but her intensity suggested this wasn't a routine professional courtesy visit. "Deputy Director Anderson, I hope you don't mind me coming here directly. I tried to schedule through official channels, but I needed to thank you personally for what your team accomplished in Operation Silent Thunder." I gestured for her to sit down, immediately recognizing the operation name. Silent Thunder had been one of my most complex counterterrorism investigations, 18 months of deep cover work that had culminated in dismantling a domestic terrorism network just 6 weeks earlier. "Please, tell me how that investigation affected your work. The intelligence your team gathered didn't just prevent the attacks," she said, her voice growing stronger. "It provided the evidence foundation for the largest domestic terrorism prosecution in federal court history. We're talking about a coordinated plot to bomb 3 major American cities during the holiday season." The memory of those final weeks came flooding back. Round-the-clock surveillance, coordinating with CIA and NSA assets, managing undercover agents whose lives depended on split-second decisions. We'd identified and neutralized the threat just 72 hours before the planned attacks. Your investigation saved thousands of lives," Lisa continued, opening her case file. "But more than that, the evidence your team collected is allowing us to prosecute not just the immediate conspirators, but the entire network that's been planning domestic attacks for over 3 years." She pulled out court documents and legal briefs. "Deputy Director Anderson, I need you to understand the scope of what you accomplished. We're prosecuting 47 defendants across 12 states. The intelligence from Silent Thunder has led to the discovery of weapons caches, training facilities, and financing networks that we never knew existed." I leaned forward, beginning to grasp the full magnitude of our operation's impact. "How many additional threats were we able to identify?" 17 separate plots in various stages of planning. Your investigation didn't just stop one attack. It unraveled an entire domestic terrorism infrastructure that had been operating under federal radar for years. Her voice grew emotional. "The FBI's work on Silent Thunder is being called the most significant counterterrorism success since 9/11. She reached into her folder again and pulled out a newspaper clipping. This is from this morning's Washington Post. The headline reads, "Federal Investigation Prevents Major Terrorist Attack." They're calling it the most sophisticated domestic terrorism plot in American history. The weight of her words hit me like lightning. For months, my family had convinced me that my FBI work was meaningless bureaucracy that wasted my legal education. But here was concrete proof that my investigations were protecting American lives on a scale that traditional legal practice could never achieve. "There's something else," Lisa continued, her eyes bright with professional respect. "The Justice Department is recommending your promotion to FBI Director. Attorney General Williams personally reviewed your case file and said your leadership on Silent Thunder demonstrates exactly the kind of strategic thinking the Bureau needs at the highest levels." She pulled out one more document, an official Justice Department memorandum. "Deputy Director Anderson, you're being considered for the top law enforcement position in the country. The woman your family thinks is wasting her potential is actually being recommended to lead the entire Federal Bureau of Investigation." Sitting in my office, looking at evidence of impact I'd never fully understood, something fundamental shifted inside me. My family's narrative crumbled completely in that moment. I wasn't hiding from real legal work. I was doing the most important legal and investigative work possible, protecting the nation's security while they argued cases in comfortable courtrooms. Lisa's visit ignited something that had been dormant for months. That evening, I sat in my secured home office with classified files spread across every surface, mapping out not just my recent operations, but the comprehensive scope of cases I'd led, terrorist plots I'd prevented, and national security threats I'd neutralized over the past 15 years. For the first time since the family dinner, I wasn't dwelling on their perception of failure. I was documenting my actual impact on American security, the real lives I'd saved through work they couldn't even imagine. I started reaching out to federal prosecutors, intelligence officials, and national security colleagues who had worked with me on major operations. The conversations were eye-opening. Marcus Rodriguez from the National Security Division told me that my counterterrorism investigations had become case studies at the FBI Academy. "Emma, your methodology for infiltrating domestic terror networks is being taught to every new agent class. Your approach to coordinating federal agencies has prevented more attacks than any other single investigator in Bureau history." The Department of Homeland Security sent me a classified impact assessment showing how my investigations had influenced national security policy. My work on Silent Thunder had led to fundamental changes in how federal agencies shared intelligence about domestic threats. The protocols I'd developed for managing undercover assets in extremist organizations were being implemented by field offices across the country. But the most powerful validation came from an unexpected source. CIA Deputy Director Janet Walsh called to discuss my potential transfer to a joint FBI-CIA counterterrorism task force. "Emma, we've been analyzing federal law enforcement leadership for 18 months. Your operational success rate, agent safety record, and intelligence gathering capabilities are unmatched in either agency. We want you to head the new National Counterterrorism Center." As I compiled this evidence, a clearer picture emerged. My family had interpreted my inability to discuss my work as evidence that it wasn't important, but the reality was that I'd been operating at the highest levels of national security, conducting operations that were too sensitive for public acknowledgement. My modest government salary wasn't a sign of limited success. It was proof that I was motivated by service rather than personal enrichment. I began organizing documents that revealed the true scope of my professional achievements. Commendation letters from 4 different FBI directors praising my exceptional leadership under extreme pressure. Joint operation reports showing successful coordination with CIA, NSA, and international intelligence services. Training records indicating my expertise in counterterrorism, cybersecurity, and organized crime investigation. More importantly, I discovered that my influence extended far beyond individual casework. The White House National Security Council had consulted me on domestic terrorism policy. The Senate Intelligence Committee had requested my input on federal law enforcement legislation. International allies had specifically asked for my participation in global counterterrorism initiatives. I found correspondence from other federal agencies describing how my investigative methods had influenced their operations. The DEA had adopted my techniques for infiltrating drug cartels. The Secret Service had implemented my protocols for threat assessment. The ATF had modified their approach to domestic extremist groups based on strategies I'd developed. But the most significant discovery came when I reviewed my classified personnel file through official channels. Over the past decade, I'd received the FBI's highest honors for operational excellence: the Presidential Medal for Distinguished Federal Civilian Service, the Intelligence Community Medal of Merit, and the FBI Director's Award for Excellence in Counterterrorism. These weren't routine government commendations. They represented recognition for work that had directly protected American lives. The numbers were staggering. My investigations had led to over 300 arrests, prevented 23 confirmed terrorist attacks, and dismantled 8 major criminal organizations. I'd supervised operations spanning 31 states and 12 countries. My case clearance rate was 94%, nearly double the federal average. The evidence was overwhelming. While my family had been measuring success through courtroom victories and legal precedents, I'd been preventing catastrophes that would have made their comfortable legal careers impossible. The failed government employee they pitied was actually one of the most successful federal law enforcement officials in American history, protecting the very freedom that allowed them to practice law safely. The breakthrough I'd been searching for came from the most unexpected place: my late grandfather's private study. Judge Samuel Anderson, my father's father, had passed away just 2 months after the disastrous family dinner. He'd been the only family member who'd ever seemed to understand my choice to serve in federal law enforcement, though he'd kept his opinions quiet around my parents and Rebecca. When my cousin called to ask if I wanted to collect any personal items from his house before the estate sale, I almost declined. But something drew me back to the study where I'd spent childhood afternoons listening to his stories about establishing civil rights protections through federal court decisions. In his mahogany desk, hidden behind decades of judicial opinions and legal precedents, I found a locked drawer I'd never noticed before. The key was taped inside his copy of To Kill a Mockingbird, with a note that read, "For Emma, the guardian of justice in the family." Inside were documents that completely stunned me. My grandfather had been quietly tracking my FBI career for years, somehow accessing public records and federal publications that revealed the true scope of my achievements. He had copies of congressional testimony where my investigations were referenced without naming me. He'd saved articles from law enforcement journals that praised breakthrough counterterrorism methodologies developed by federal agents. He'd even kept documentation of awards and commendations that I'd never told the family about. But the most shocking discovery was a thick folder labeled Emma's Real Service Record. Inside were printed emails, official documents, and records that revealed my family had actually known much more about my success than they'd ever admitted, and had been actively working to minimize its significance. There was an email chain between my parents from just 3 months before the family dinner. Samuel keeps bringing up articles about federal law enforcement successes and asking pointed questions about Emma's career level. He seems to think she's much more important than we've been led to believe. We need to be careful about how we discuss her position. If she's actually senior leadership, it makes Rebecca's prosecutor role look less impressive by comparison. Another email, this one from Rebecca to my mother, was even more revealing. Mom, I checked with some colleagues about Emma's actual rank and responsibilities. They were surprisingly cagey about giving me specifics, which suggests she might be more senior than we thought. Should I be concerned about how my criticism of her career reflects on my own federal work? But the most devastating find was a letter my father had written to my grandfather but apparently never sent. Dad, I know you're proud of Emma's service, but we're concerned about encouraging unrealistic expectations about government work. Her federal position seems to involve a lot of secrecy and travel, which suggests either she's exaggerating her importance or she's involved in work that's too dangerous for family discussion. Either way, we think it's better to encourage her toward more stable legal practice. My grandfather had also uncovered something I'd never known. My family had been actively discouraging federal agencies from sharing information about my career progression. Through his judicial contacts, he'd learned that my parents had been telling people I preferred privacy about my government work, to avoid attention that might interfere with my career development. At the bottom of the drawer was a letter from my grandfather, written in his careful judicial handwriting just days before he died. My dearest Emma, if you're reading this, then they've succeeded in making you doubt the value of your service. But I've been watching your career with the same attention I gave to landmark civil rights cases. You're not wasting your legal education. You're using it to protect the Constitution itself. Your family measures success by courtroom victories and legal prestige, but you measure it by lives saved and threats neutralized. They see government service where I see the highest calling of law enforcement. The promotion is coming, Emma. I've heard whispers through federal judicial channels. When it's announced, don't let them claim they always knew. Make them face the truth about what they refuse to see. You haven't been practicing law. You've been defending it at the highest level possible. And sometimes the people who understand justice the least are the ones who practice it most conventionally. Armed with my grandfather's evidence, I began digging deeper into my family's systematic campaign to undermine my federal career. What I discovered was more calculated and deliberate than I could have imagined. They hadn't just been concerned about my career choices. They'd been actively working to suppress knowledge of my achievements, because my success in federal law enforcement threatened their narrow definition of legal accomplishment. I reached out to federal colleagues and legal professionals, asking careful questions about what they'd heard regarding my family's view of my FBI work. The responses revealed a disturbing pattern. Judge Patricia Morrison admitted she'd always found it strange that my family never attended federal law enforcement ceremonies or recognition events. Emma, your parents were invited to the FBI Director's Award ceremony when you received the Medal for Excellence in Counterterrorism. Most families would consider that the honor of a lifetime. They declined without explanation. The pattern became clear. My family had been systematically avoiding any public association with my federal achievements, while simultaneously promoting their narrative that I needed career guidance and direction. I contacted legal publications that had tried to feature federal law enforcement success stories, asking if my family had ever been approached for comment about my work. Michael Chen from Federal Law Enforcement magazine revealed something shocking. Emma, your mother was contacted last year when we were preparing a feature on successful legal families in federal service. She specifically requested that we not include your FBI work, saying that law enforcement careers were too specialized for general legal audiences. But the smoking gun came when I obtained internal correspondence through a colleague who had access to interagency communications. Rebecca had been making inquiries about my security clearance level and operational responsibilities through official channels, ostensibly to avoid conflicts of interest in her prosecutions, but actually to gather information she could use to diminish my achievements. In one particularly damaging email to the U.S. Attorney's Office, Rebecca had written, "I want to ensure there are no conflicts between my prosecutorial work and my sister's FBI activities. While I'm sure her assignments are meaningful to her, I need to understand the scope of her responsibilities to maintain appropriate professional boundaries." More shocking still was the discovery that my father had been quietly discouraging legal colleagues from referring federal cases to agencies where I might be involved. Through a contact at the Department of Justice, I learned that my father had been telling potential clients that federal investigations were unpredictable and that family connections to law enforcement could complicate legal strategies. The most devastating revelation came from an unlikely source, my family's own attorney, who had inadvertently revealed their coordinated strategy during a casual conversation with a federal prosecutor. They'd been consulting with legal ethics experts about how to manage potential conflicts arising from having a family member in federal law enforcement while maintaining their own legal practices. My mother had been even more systematic in her efforts to contain my influence. She'd contacted several prestigious law schools where I'd been invited to speak about federal careers, suggesting that my specialized government experience might not provide the best guidance for students seeking traditional legal careers. The final piece of evidence came from the most unexpected source, Rebecca's own personnel file, which I accessed through official channels during a background check coordination. Despite her public criticism of my career, Rebecca had been quietly leveraging our relationship to gain access to federal law enforcement resources and intelligence for her prosecutions. The pattern was unmistakable. My family hadn't just been worried about my career path. They'd been terrified that my actual achievements would expose their own limitations and make their traditional legal successes appear ordinary by comparison. They'd systematically worked to hide my accomplishments, because those accomplishments threatened their carefully constructed hierarchy of legal prestige. I realized that my grandfather's prediction had been right. The FBI director nomination was coming, and when it was announced, there would be no way for my family to maintain their fiction about my career failure anymore. The question was, how would I handle the power that was about to be officially recognized? The call came on a snowy January morning while I was reviewing national security briefings in my secured office. Attorney General Williams was on the line, her voice carrying the gravity of someone delivering historic news. "Emma, the president has made his decision. You're his nominee for Director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. The announcement will be made this afternoon, but we wanted you to be the first to know you're about to become the youngest FBI director in the agency's history." I sat in stunned silence for a moment, then managed to respond. "Madam Attorney General, I'm deeply honored by the President's confidence." "Emma, this isn't just about confidence. Your leadership on counterterrorism operations, your innovative approach to federal law enforcement, and your ability to coordinate with international agencies represent exactly what the Bureau needs in the 21st century. You've earned this." The irony was overwhelming. While my family had been calling me a career failure hiding in government bureaucracy, the President of the United States had been reviewing my service record and selecting me for the highest law enforcement position in the country. The news broke 2 hours later when the White House announced the nomination. Every major news outlet led with the story. President nominates Emma Anderson as FBI Director. Counterterrorism expert tapped to lead Bureau. And Yale law graduate's federal career culminates in historic appointment. The coverage detailed my background in national security operations and my role in preventing major terrorist attacks, describing the nomination as recognition of exceptional leadership in protecting American security. My phone exploded with congratulatory calls from federal judges, national security officials, and law enforcement leaders around the world. But the calls I was most curious about still hadn't come. My family remained completely silent. The real moment of vindication came exactly 1 week later. Rebecca had scheduled a dinner to celebrate her latest prosecution victory, inviting several federal prosecutors, including Michael Torres, who had been at the original family dinner where I'd been humiliated. I wasn't planning to attend, but something compelled me to make an appearance. I arrived at the restaurant to find my entire family seated around a large table with several federal prosecutors, celebrating Rebecca's successful conviction of a major organized crime figure. The conversation was animated, with Rebecca describing her courtroom strategy and receiving praise for her legal work. Michael Torres was in the middle of congratulating Rebecca when he noticed me entering the restaurant. His expression changed immediately from casual conversation to something approaching shock. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, standing up from the table and addressing my family, "I believe you should know who just walked into this restaurant." The table fell silent as Michael continued, his voice carrying the authority of someone who understood federal hierarchy. "Mr. and Mrs. Anderson, Rebecca, I need to tell you something about your daughter and sister that apparently hasn't been properly communicated." He gestured toward me as I approached the table. "This is Emma Anderson, the President's nominee for Director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. The woman you've been calling a career failure is about to become the head of the most powerful law enforcement agency in the world. My mother's face went completely white. My father looked like he might collapse. Rebecca stared at me with an expression of absolute disbelief. Director Anderson, Michael continued, his tone becoming more formal, has been leading the FBI's most critical counterterrorism operations for the past 5 years. The cases I prosecute often depend on intelligence gathered by her teams. Your daughter isn't a failed government employee. She's been protecting this nation at the highest levels of federal law enforcement. The restaurant seemed to hold its breath as Michael's words sank in. The family that thinks she wasted her legal education has no idea that she's been using it to defend the Constitution itself. For the first time in my life, my family was completely speechless. The daughter they'd called a failure was about to lead the FBI. 6 months later, I stood in the J. Edgar Hoover Building, taking the oath of office as the 11th Director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. As the youngest person and only the second woman to hold this position, I was leading an agency of 37,000 employees dedicated to protecting American security and upholding the rule of law. The same federal career my family had dismissed as bureaucratic failure was now being recognized as one of the most significant appointments in law enforcement history. The transformation hadn't just been professional, it had been deeply personal. The woman who had once questioned her worth after family rejection was gone, replaced by someone who understood that true service comes not from seeking approval but from protecting others, even when that protection goes unrecognized and unappreciated. My leadership of the FBI had already begun reshaping how federal law enforcement approached modern threats. We'd implemented new protocols for coordinating international counterterrorism efforts, developed innovative approaches to cybersecurity investigations, and created training programs that were being adopted by law enforcement agencies worldwide. The methodologies I'd developed during my years as an agent were now being institutionalized at the highest levels of federal policy. The Senate confirmation hearings had been a watershed moment, with senators from both parties praising my operational record and strategic vision for the Bureau's future. Senator Patricia Walsh had said during my confirmation, "Director Anderson represents the evolution of American law enforcement, someone who combines deep legal expertise with operational excellence and an unwavering commitment to constitutional principles." My family had eventually reached out, of course. It started with formal congratulations after the nomination was announced, then awkward invitations to family gatherings, where they could now proudly introduce me as Emma, the FBI director. They wanted to reconcile, to celebrate this incredible achievement together, and share in the prestige that came with having the nation's top law enforcement officer as a family member. I met with them once, in my private office at FBI headquarters. They came prepared with elaborate apologies and revisionist history. My mother talked about how she'd always believed in my dedication to public service. My father mentioned how proud he'd been of my commitment to justice. Rebecca claimed she'd always known I was building something important, but had been protecting me from premature expectations that might have interfered with my career development. I listened politely, then shared something they didn't expect. I'd established the Samuel Anderson Foundation for Federal Service, named after my grandfather. The foundation provided scholarships for first-generation college students pursuing careers in federal law enforcement, funded training programs for rural law enforcement agencies, and created mentorship opportunities connecting experienced federal agents with young people from underserved communities. "This is my real mission," I told them. "Not just leading the FBI, but ensuring that federal service attracts the best people regardless of their background or family connections." Grandpa Samuel understood that justice requires people who are willing to serve something bigger than themselves. I didn't cut them off completely, but I didn't pretend that their sudden pride meant anything either. They'd revealed their true values when they thought I was powerless, and that knowledge had freed me from needing their validation or approval. The most meaningful vindication came from an unexpected source. Agent Lisa Chen, the prosecutor who had first opened my eyes to my impact, was now working as a liaison between the Justice Department and the FBI. "Director Anderson," she told me during a staff meeting, "you've transformed how federal agencies collaborate on national security. The protocols you've implemented are preventing threats we don't even know about yet." My office walls now displayed photos from international law enforcement conferences, commendations from heads of state, and thank you letters from families whose loved ones had been protected by FBI operations. But the centerpiece was still my grandfather's letter, framed next to a photo of us together when I was 12 years old, both of us holding copies of the Constitution he'd used during his civil rights cases. The FBI had become more than a career. It was proof that public service could create lasting change while maintaining the highest standards of constitutional protection. Every morning, I walked through the halls of the Hoover Building knowing that 37,000 agents and analysts were working to protect American freedoms under my leadership. The woman who had been called a failure at her family's dinner table had become the person responsible for protecting every family in America. And the best part? I'd done it by staying true to my principles and refusing to let anyone else define the value of serving something greater than personal ambition. My name is Director Emma Anderson, and I am exactly who I was always meant to be. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.